recording, okay? And everyone can see my notes, right? Everyone can see my notes? Okay, all right. Okay, thanks, Adarsh. Thanks for responding. So I'll just quickly repeat. So formalism, we gave you a good example of formalism with that regarding the release of that juvenile in the Nirbhaya case. Okay, we share your concerns, but we have to go by the law, okay, as it stands today. Okay, this is almost not relevant. Let's go by the law. So whatever the judges may feel that this is not a good outcome, it's not a good decision. The judges may feel that guy should have remained in jail, but they are following, they're being very disciplined and they're following the law as it is written. And so this is what the essence of legal formalism is this, that the judges are supposed to put aside their personal value systems and their preferences in terms of social policy and other policies, but and they have to go by the law as it is written, and the law was very clear that he should not be detained. Okay, so it's old. I'm just repeating that point, but we'll just think. So and descriptive and prescriptive also I described. So when you talk about formalism, realism as just describing how they are, then it's a descriptive, just describing what is formalism, what is realism. That's a descriptive approach. And the other is the prescriptive approach, where you start talking about this is better or this is better. Okay, so that's all that the statement means. Okay, so all these are taken from Professor Solam's blog, which I've linked to at the back, okay, right at the end. It's a legal theory lexicon blog. So these are good ways to understand some of these ideas. Not all of it is not taken from there, but some of these ideas are taken from there. So that you have to give credit also where otherwise it becomes political. Okay, so as you can see here, that legal formalism, okay, is more consistent with the separation of powers theory. Okay, and you have So now if we talk prescriptively, what we would say in terms of formalism, if I want to prefer formalism to, if you look at a defense of formalism, now we are talking about the two things in a prescriptive way. Okay, so we take formalism. If we prefer formalism, we have two reasons to prefer that. One is that it it produces over time more consistent results from the judgments, because it's harder to deviate from the written text of the law. Okay, so this is because I'll just write it, because harder to deviate from written text of law. Not writing perfect English here, but just writing, getting the point across. Okay, so harder to deviate from the written text of the law. So the variation will be much less than if every judge is allowed to follow his own preferences with respect to economic policies and social policies, etc. Okay, so so the other important point why formalism is preferred is because it is more consistent with the idea of separation of powers. Judges refuse to make the law; they always only interpret the law, as you can see here. They are only interpreting the law. They are refusing to make the law. So therefore, that is more consistent with separation of powers, because the legislature makes the law, not the judges. So what the judges are saying here, you can see this clearly, that if you want the guy to be detained beyond 3 years, then why don't you ask the legislature to pass the law? If it is so important to society, the legislature should respond and pass the law. So all these changes which came after the Nirbhaya case, that was because of social pressure, and Parliament actually made new laws because in response to the social pressure. So but judges did not make the law. So therefore, this is a formalist approach to jurisprudence is actually much more consistent with separation of powers. So those who, if you see here, if you connect it to talk about the process focus later. So if you see all the connection, those who prefer liberty, okay, those who have a focus on liberty, okay, so from liberty you want to minimize government power, because very often there is a conflict, okay, so minimize government power. If you have right, you want to minimize government power, and then that or minimize or potential for tyranny, okay, or potential for abuse of power or tyranny, Okay, so you see the connection here. So I think it's important to bring out the connection. Uh, if you value individual liberty, okay, the whole thing starts from valuing individual liberty, because the whole point of or everything we do in life is based on individual liberty, your choice to become something. And people don't tell you what to do. Every person decides how to exploit his talent. If you connect it all the way back to the point I made about Stephen Spender and his statement about every individual's duty is to exploit his potential. So, say A.R. Rahman decides to become a music director, nobody tells him, you don't have a government telling A.R. Rahman, no, you should become a clerk in the post office. Okay, that's what we have decided for you. It is the liberty of the individual to express himself and choose his profession. Okay, and so this is what is, you see the whole vision of, individual should achieve his potential. So for that, he needs liberty. You need to minimize, to protect individual liberty, you need to minimize government power, okay, or the potential for abuse of power or tyranny. Okay, so that in doing that, the correct separation of powers has a very important role to play, because whatever power is there in the government, it's split into separate arms of government, branches of government, so that one person can't have, Donald Trump as president doesn't have all the powers. A lot of the powers are with the legislature. Legislature doesn't have all the powers because some of the powers are with the judiciary. So all of these techniques for minimizing the potential for tyranny. So separation of powers. So this is why this formalism is good. Okay, that you achieve your potential by exercising your liberty, and for that you need to minimize the potential for tyranny. For that you need to use separation of powers, and formalism is more consistent with separation of powers. So that's another important point. That's another reason for formalism. And the other is, of course, you get more consistent results. Now, another point I wanted to make about is the new term that we introduced in Section A, new set of terms, which you guys should be familiar with. Even it's very useful in a business context as well. Whenever you are analyzing a set of businesses, okay, different types of businesses, it's one way of looking at it is to think about a process focus or versus an outcome focus. Okay, so if you, for instance, take, let's say, an oil refinery, okay, okay, or a chemical plant or something like that, or a bottling plant, okay, or let's say you're running a Pepsi bottling plant, all right. So these kind of things, these kind of businesses are better managed with a process focus, because these are very process driven, and we know that the same kind of, because it's all related to physics and engineering. So therefore, you know that certain types of inputs will always produce certain types of outputs. So in these kinds of highly standardized kind of businesses, it is better to approach them from manage them with a very strong process focus, okay, because you know that if you follow the processes, you'll necessarily have the same outcome, okay. But if you take another kind of thing, for instance, like let's say, if you take education, okay, now education is a very creative enterprise, okay, so is a very creative enterprise, okay, so it's a creative business. So here it is much more appropriate to have an outcome focus. So we want to focus on whether, let's say, if you take a business school, okay, we are focused only on the outcome, in the sense that we want to produce outstanding business students, okay. So outstanding business students is all we care about. So different teachers might follow different methods in teaching their subjects, okay. And the only thing that matters is, are they actually contributing to producing good, highly qualified and prepared business students who are industry ready or job ready. So we should not actually tell teachers too much about, should not standardize processes too much in anything which is a creative enterprise, okay. So in a creative enterprise, outcome focus is much better, okay. So it's a useful way to think about it. You should have this idea in your head, that you have this idea of process focus versus outcome focus, which can be very useful in business strategy contexts when you evaluate different types of what is the appropriate approach to managing a business. All right. So this is the way. Now, this can be applied even in the formalism, realism sense. So one thing you have to understand is that formalism actually reflects a process focus. So the other class, Narek was asking questions about, he was actually talking about formalism as something that was negative, because formalist approach to the Hindu law actually prevented the abolition of Hindu traditions like Hindu customs like sati and things like that. So he was saying that it's not a good thing because it can actually prevent the necessary changes from coming about. But actually, this formalism is not really about outcomes. So Meredith was talking from an outcome point of view. But actually, the point to understand here is that formalism does not really concern itself with outcomes. Okay, formalism is really a process-focused approach, which really has a long-term approach. Okay, it's a long-term kind of focus, which basically says that if you follow, it's important to follow the process. The process has a sanctity of its own. So in the case of the criticism about sati and all these things, what formalists would say is that fine, the society requires certain changes, then the society should make those changes through the appropriate method, which is go through the legislature, okay, and get the legislature. So if it is so important, like the parliament was able to respond in the Nirbhaya case and make these changes. Actually, what people don't know is that the same thing which happened in the Nirbhaya case, the changes which came in the law after the Nirbhaya case, actually 10 years ago, there was a case called Sakshi versus Union of India. You can read it up, you can look it up, and I'll just mention it here. Reference for formalism is a process focus. Okay, so I can maybe write it here just as an aside. Okay, so changes in law after. So this may be a little bit confusing the way I'm writing it because many points are mixed together. But if you find it confusing, tell me, I'll clean up the notes. But here I'm trying to just, I'm not writing correct English here. I'm not writing the Nirbhaya case. Okay, were requested 10 years ago. Okay, 10 years earlier. Okay, you can look up this case, Sakshi versus India, basically. I'm not going to write Union of India. I'm just going to write India. Okay. This was requested in Sakshi versus Union of India. The government gave the Supreme Court gave a very formalist interpretation, and they said that essentially in this case, Sakshi is an NGO. They asked for the changes in the law relating to offenses against women. Okay. So of the type that happened in the Nirbhaya case. So the Supreme Court said, no, nothing doing, we can't do it. If you want, you can get it done by the legislature. We have to follow the law. So that was a formalist approach in the Sakshi case. And this actually came 10 years before Nirbhaya. So ultimately what happens, if you see, so if you come back to Nareth's criticism, it's an important criticism that helps you to also understand what formalism is really all about. It reflects a respect for the process, that we will not damage the sanctity of the separation of powers, even though you may have bad outcomes in the short run. So you had sati going on in India for many, many years until it was actually abolished by through the efforts of Raja Ram Mohan Roy, and I think Lord Bentinck was involved at that time as the English viceroy. So there is a lot of bad outcomes for many years, but formalism says, okay, that's too bad, but we will not disturb the process, the sanctity of the process there in the separation of powers. Okay, so this is basically what happened in India too. In the Sakshi case, the Supreme Court said, they took a very formalist view and they said, no, we can't make these changes. It's not our job. The changes have to be made in the legislature. We have to follow the law as it is written. And then eventually this unfortunate incident happened, and then the parliament moved to make the changes in the law. All right. So there's something new that you learn, process focus versus outcome focus. So try to introduce this in your debates whenever you have debates. Okay. So please remember, you have to get involved in debates. Now, why are we discussing all this? Now, it's a little bit you could think it's a little bit highfalutin. Why are we getting into all these philosophical discussions? But these are exactly the kind of ideas that you have to be comfortable with. This is a dramatic change from your, education so far, where you have generally learned things, you mucked it up and just, wrote it out in the exam. Here you have to start thinking, and so these are abstract ideas, and you have to get comfortable with these ideas and have discussions employing these principles, etc. Okay, so this is how you get trained as a business student. So if things are seeming that they're kind of very strange, I think probably that's a good thing, because it better seem strange to you, because we better be teaching in a way that is very different from what you have studied so far. Okay, because that's not good for you, what you've been taught so far. That kind of teaching method is not really good. So So this is basically what I'm saying here. Okay, so this is just to add to that discussion. Right, so then you have legal history. We've gone through all this in your class. We've gone through this stuff, instrumentalism. We have gone through all these cases, all right? And so you can read this. I've kept this as optional, all right? So if you have, like Soumya was asking questions in the other class about this, so you can read about all this stuff. I'm not going to discuss this in detail, but you can read it up here. I've given those things. Now, ex-ante versus ex-post also I've discussed in the other in your previous class. So I'll just add one more element, that the ex-post perspective here is a backward-looking perspective. Okay, so you can see this. We discussed it. Ex-post is very similar to formalism. Okay, so who acted badly in the sense who broke the law. If somebody broke the law, Varun broke the law, then Varun has to be punished. Now, if it is, if it is uncomfortable for him, well, that's too bad because he broke the law, so he has to be punished. So this is what basically we don't really care about the outcomes. Okay, it's very process focused. Okay, so you can think of it as opposed to outcome focused. So ex-post is very similar to the formalist idea. So these are all distinctions that we are studying, which are very similar to each other. Okay. The reason we are studying this is because we want to follow this principle of whenever you study some distinction, we want to think about all the other distinctions which are similar to the one we are studying. It's not the same, but they're very, very similar. So therefore, we will study them. Okay, so that it broadens your perspective. Okay, and it has other benefits also, I think, in terms of recall and all, as I mentioned earlier. Okay. Now, ex-ante is a forward-looking perspective. Now, let me give you an example of ex-ante. I think this is kind of where we stopped the other day in your class. Okay, look at this example. Now, here. If you remember, one of the things that was happening in the Nirbhaya case, in the ex-ante perspective, okay, which is very similar to instrumentalism or realism, okay, where we are very, very focused on outcomes, okay, very focused on consequences, that if we decide the case in this way, will it produce good consequences or bad consequences? And so based on that perspective, remember now, also notice, whenever anybody uses these words, be very careful. These are all subjective words, okay, what is good or bad? I can say that, drinking is bad. Somebody else can say, no, drinking is good. Actually, if you drink wine, people who live long have a habit of drinking wine, red wine and all that. So what is good or bad? So don't get fooled by these things, because people try to manipulate other people by using words like good or bad. These are highly subjective words, okay? What is good or bad? So when you're talking about this, a very subjective kind of focus, and therefore it is consistent with realism, where every judge decides what the outcome should be. Okay, so we talked about that case in the Delhi Rent Control Act, where one Supreme Court judge decided that even though the Act actually says that this provision has to be applied only to residential properties, this judge decided that, well, that's not really fair. I think it should apply even to commercial properties. Nothing written in the law about commercial property, but he just decided that in this case, he ruled in that way and decided to apply that rule to even commercial properties. Okay, the total violation of the law. But he just gets to make the law because he is a Supreme Court judge. Okay, so it's very outcome-focused approach, as you can see, as opposed to process-focused. So another way to understand ex-ante versus ex-post, right? So this is another. So I'm adding this distinction. So as we study these distinctions, we are also trying to connect these distinctions to the other distinctions that we have studied before. All right. So we have connected ex-ante, ex-post to formalism, realism, to process-focused, outcome-focused, etc. Okay. So distinguish. So here is a little bit about what is the importance of the distinction. Okay. So a consequentialist, basically, this eventually it goes into a distinction between ex-ante and ex-post. There's another distinction coming down further down the road, down the notes. Okay. Distinction between ex-ante and ex-post is going to talk about the theoretical divide between consequentialist and deontological. These are very big words, but once I explain it, it should be quite simple. Okay, it's the same thing basically. All right, they're very, very similar. Okay, not the same thing, but very, very similar. Okay, so again, we talk about, what will be the consequences of making this kind of law. Let me give you an example again, which you can relate to. I told you about our law professor from law faculty, DU law faculty, Professor Vivekananda, who was, if you remember that time, and when the Nirbhaya case happened, there was a debate in the parliament about, and society in general, okay, that amendments to the bill, okay, this one, okay. So we wanted to, society wanted this, most people, I mean, many people wanted it at least, okay, that this should happen, that this guy should not get released, like what happened, the guy got released, okay. So court refuses to block the release, all right. Now people didn't like it, so they said, let's make a law where we can try these guys as adults because they have committed heinous crimes. Now, there were people like Professor Vivekananda who were opposed to that. She was saying that if you do this, this will call them, this will be, harmful to children. Okay, things like that. So these kind of arguments were also offered on the other side, but that was not a very strong voice actually, because not many people subscribed to it. Now that doesn't mean that they're wrong. It's just a different point of view. So the point here is that this is a classic example of a consequentialist approach, especially those who were talking about let's not make these amendments. Okay, they're saying let's not make these amendments. What does that mean? I mean, what does that represent? That represents, here you can see, okay, in fact, the J.S. Verma committee also, actually, J.S. Verma, the former Supreme Court judge, they're saying that the amendments put all children at risk across all classes. Okay, now, therefore, you can see here they're referring to some of these people like Professor Vivekananda. So now these people are saying, okay, if you do this, this will be the consequence. Okay, so you notice this is a classic example of what is meant by what we will discuss later. This is an ex-ante perspective. If we decide if we make this kind of changes, what will be the consequences? So before you make the change, you pass the judgment. Okay, so there's going to be some background noise and disturbance. I will just continue and just ignore the background noise. Okay, so now you can see. All right. Now here you can see that, so what will be the good or bad consequence? You can see this is a good example of this kind of argument being offered. Is a good example of a consequentialist or ex-ante perspective. Okay, so they're saying if you don't do this because it will have. So here you can see this is very outcome focused, because these guys are saying, no, if you do this, this will be a crime against all children. It will penalize all children. So don't make these kind of amendments. All right. So this is what they're talking about here. That ex-ante ex-post is connected to consequentialist and deontological, which we will discuss later. So again, it's the same thing. It is a very similar thing. That a consequentialist cares about the consequences of attaching liability or changing the law in this manner, etc. So you can see here, we'll come to this consequentialism versus deontology, which is, now again, we are connecting it. So there's another distinction. This is our last distinction, I think. Consequentialism is very similar to ex-ante. You can see the whole debate. Right here, you can see the whole debate. Okay. Warning against these amendments, calling them a crime against children, etc., and warning that the amendments put all children at risk. If you do this, if you make 16-year-olds and 18-year-olds liable, this is what we call what is meant by attaching liability as to be tried as adults. This will be the consequences. So don't do it. This is a consequentialist approach. It's an ex-ante approach. Okay, so it's talking about right kind of consequences. Now, again, you can see what is right. Right is a very subjective word. Okay, many people would have said, what do you mean by bad consequences? If they have committed heinous crimes, that means they're essentially they have acted like an adult. Okay, if they were actually a child, they would not have committed such heinous crimes. So by committing these crimes, they have become adults, sort of. So why should we not punish them? So that would be the other side of the argument. All right, so don't forget that right is also like good. Right is also highly subjective. What is right? Okay, some people say, like the Marxist argument is that stealing is okay. Stealing should not be illegal because I am stealing because I'm a poor man, and Mukesh Ambani has a lot of money, so I can steal one of his cars because I don't have money, so I have the right to steal. This is a Marxist argument, okay? But most people will not agree with this argument because in most societies we punish theft, okay? And we basically say that theft is bad. But you should be also aware of the Marxist kind of argument where they say that, oh, if I'm poor and if I have a need, then I can steal your stuff. Okay, so and that should be okay. It should not be criminal. It should not be criminalized. So, and in the US, actually, there is a lot of these kind of Marxist arguments are actually making a lot of ground. They're actually gaining ground a lot in many jurisdictions of the US, like in San Francisco. I don't know if you guys are aware. They have made it lesser crime to steal. Okay, so if you steal up to 900, I think below $1,000, then if you steal some property below $1,000, it's not a felony. It becomes a misdemeanor, which is a much smaller offense. So they're actually making it a lesser crime, which is why what is happening. There's a lot of increase in theft, but only up to $1,000 of products. So people are going to shops and looking at the price tag, and if it's below $1,000, they're just walking out with the stuff because they know the consequence is not serious. So this is all. So again, to understand the right concept. Okay. So what is right? It's a very subjective word. So for a Marxist, stealing is okay. If you're poor, you have the right to steal. Now, this consequentialism is also connected to another well-known principle, which is called utilitarianism. If you've studied economics, you're familiar with this, okay? Which is attributed mainly to Bentham, but also to John Stuart Mill. Okay, utilitarianism is a sort of a consequentialist view. Okay, it's a species of consequentialism where you talk about that the optimal policy choice should be the one that produces the greatest good for the greatest number. This is the language of utilitarianism. Once again, please be careful when people start using language like this. This is highly subjective. What is good? Okay, I can say, somebody can take a view that, what we used to have in Hindu society earlier, tradition of child marriage, young girls used to get married, that somebody could have said that was good. It's a very subjective matter. Okay, what is good is a very subjective matter, and other people would have said that was not correct. So, so don't get fooled by these kind of words. This is highly subjective. Okay, so for instance, you look at this policy. We discussed this policy in the previous class. It's a very important discussion, actually. So I'll go into it right now, which is the point about the minimum wage. Now, in India, as you know, we have a minimum wage law. Okay, I don't remember what the exact requirement is, but the point is we have the central government has mandated a minimum wage. Okay, so if you're employing somebody in your business, you have to pay the minimum wage. Now, is this good or bad? Now, many people think, okay, this is, especially in our country, wow, this is a great thing. We are so nice, we are such a kind society that we have mandated that everybody should have a minimum wage. All right. So, okay. So somebody has again switched off the video. Guys, please don't switch off the video of the classroom. Okay, we have to keep the video of the classroom on, so please don't switch it off. Okay, now if you see here, now coming back to this minimum wage argument, okay, which is, so I'll give you an example of the debate that is happening in the US right now, which is they're trying to introduce a $15 federal minimum wage. A federal means a central government wage, okay? So everyone in the country will have to follow it. Now, is this a good thing or a bad thing? Many people say it's a good thing, okay? Or if you could say, yeah, if you say that, is this too high a threshold? Yeah, I mean, this is the people who are against the minimum wage. So the good part is, is very familiar. You're familiar with the good part, the arguments in favor of the minimum wage, that everybody has a little bit of money, a good amount of money to support their families. So in India, we don't have to talk about the good side of the argument here because most of the people in India are very socialistic. So everybody in this country will say that this is a great thing. Okay. So I'm going to just talk to you about the negative side of this. Okay. Now, this is not meant to make you agree with me. It's not because not that you have to agree with me. I think that this is a bad idea. So I'll tell you why I think it's a bad idea. Not because you have to agree with me. Okay, it's never like that. But I want you to understand how to argue the other side and how to defend a policy position. So my policy position is opposed to the minimum wage. So I want you to learn how to defend this kind of a policy position because these are the kind of important debates that you want to have. if you remember our budget discussion that we had, there were actually people who were more free market oriented, like Mr. Sardana, and you had more people who are more socialistic in their outlook, like I forget the name of the professor from the Institute of Social Studies, who was saying, we should have more investment in education, government investment, etc. Those kind of things. So these are policy debates, and you should be able to participate in them. Now, what's the problem with the minimum wage? So once again, I'm going maybe a little quickly, okay? But at the same time, you have to, you should not, if there's anything that you don't understand, so please don't switch off. You're mature students now. You're old enough to understand that if we study this, I'm going to be teaching this course mostly from a lecture kind of, very traditional kind of, we'll have to change some of our plans which we had about presentations. So it will be taught mainly in a very traditional lecture mode, okay, like you have in the traditional universities. But that does not mean that you cannot learn from it. You can very much learn a lot from it, very well learn a lot from it by paying attention. And if I say something, like if I talk about process focus versus outcome focus, and you haven't understood, your job is to ask a question and make sure I clarify the point. And don't sort of stop, or don't say I've understood until you've actually understood. Okay, so because I'm going on and on in one at one pace, please make sure that you guys whenever you don't understand something, you should be able to ask a question. Okay. All right. Now, here, what is now you see here, so what is the argument against the minimum wage? All right. The argument against the minimum wage is that it's probably too high a threshold. If you look at, let's say, if you take anybody here, if you take, say, Dipakshi wants to open a cafe. Okay. Now, maybe she can actually, now you don't have a lot of business when you open a new cafe, but maybe she can actually support 6 workers, paying them $12 an hour. But if there's a central government rule saying that you have to pay $15 an hour, okay, what happens then is that Dipakshi's business will not succeed. Because if you force this kind of high labor cost structure on her, she's not making enough money in a new business to support this, and basically she will keep on making losses, and eventually her capital gets wiped out, risk capital, her equity capital gets wiped out, and she has to shut down her cafe. So what happened? Those 6 workers who were being paid initially, she might have hired. In fact, she may not even start the business, because she'll do the numbers and calculations and she see that I can't actually, based on the projected revenues, I can't support a $15 minimum wage. Okay, so what happens then is a new cafe which might have started, might have employed 6 workers and given them $12 an hour. Okay, that also doesn't happen. So these guys who are basically now they're earning nothing. But if you didn't have this rule, they might have got $12. Maybe they have enough money only for breakfast. They don't have money for lunch and dinner, but that's still better than not eating anything. Something is better than nothing, right? So now today it starts like this. So she starts out her cafe with $12 an hour. And then after 1 or 2 years of making good money, then she can actually get, maybe she has enough of a solid stream of income. Then maybe she can raise the wages for her employees, okay, to $15 an hour. So it was not possible initially, but after a couple of hours, it can be raised to $15 an hour. But then for that, you must have the flexibility. You can't have this kind of a rigid rule, which will prevent the business from starting in the first place. So a business which starts initially, Neeraj, is there any problem in the room? Which? Oh. All right. Okay, so we'll continue here. If you have a problem, just let me know. Okay, so the problem here with the minimum wage is that by having this rule, you are preventing Dipakshi from starting the cafe in the first place. Okay, so and therefore this thing, the whole good story doesn't happen. If you allowed her the flexibility to start with any wage level, whatever the market can support, she would have started, and maybe she'd run the business for 2 years, make a lot of money, and then start moving up her minimum wage, and she can attract better workers. So this is how an economy grows, by small businesses starting. They struggle for a few years, then they start making good money, then they become bigger. Okay, so everything starts small and then becomes big. So even Amazon started as a very small business. So this is the problem with the minimum wage, that actually it seems to be good for people. It seems to be that you're a very kind society, but actually you're unkind. And what kind of people are hurt by this kind of policy? Now, see, if you're a MIT grad from, if you studied electrical engineering, master's in electrical engineering from MIT, you're going to get hired by Google or somebody, for $200,000. You're okay. You're not a problem. You don't have a problem. But the guy who doesn't have the opportunity to get that education, maybe he comes from a very poor family, not very well educated. Now, this is a guy, what can he do? He can do some low-skilled stuff, right? Unskilled, low-skilled, okay? We can make this low-skilled, okay? These guys, what can they do? They can flip burgers at McDonald's. So if you make the McDonald's franchisee pay $15 an hour, he can't even set up the franchise. So the poor guy here who doesn't have any skills, okay, he therefore can't get a job. Now, this is usually the kind of first job for most people who have no skills or very low skills. And this is how they go up the ladder. So if he's a hardworking guy, he'll get a job at a McDonald's, flip burgers. Maybe he'll go to night school. Maybe he'll upgrade himself, get an MBA, online MBA or something like that. Okay, or executive MBA. Then he'll become, good enough for a managerial job. It'll pay more. Okay, then he can afford to start a family. This is how it works. Okay, so if you put this kind of rule on top, it's very bad for businesses. So right now they're discussing this in the US. And of course, the OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, is saying it's going to lead to a lot of job losses, because all those small businesses which are running today, maybe they're paying $12 an hour, paying 6 workers, but it's still a business, right? You're paying some people. The guys are earning something or the other, at least something. Okay. These guys are all going to be out of business because maybe they don't have enough money to support this kind of cost structure, and they're out. So these guys are going to lose their jobs. So this is usually the problem with a minimum wage kind of approach. So it seems like a nice thing, makes you feel good. You're such a kind society that you have given a minimum wage so that everybody has something. Everyone has some good living wage. They talk about a living wage, right? So, but you have to also look at the end of the day, if it's not sustainable, okay, it has to sustain itself in the market economy, right? At the end of the day, is it sustainable? It's like Air India, okay? Isn't it cute? We have our own national airline, but we couldn't make it work, massive losses. You look at Singapore Airlines. Singapore Airlines is also a national airline of a very, very small country. And look at how successful Singapore Airlines is. And look at what a disaster Air India has been. Even though Air India Maharaja is a great brand, but they just managed it so badly that it's been a drain on resources. They've allowed these government ministers to take rides on the airplanes, and very, very badly managed. So you have to look at the sustainability of it. And now we are talking about selling Air India. Just imagine what a waste of money. Thousands of crores poured down the drain, and now we are talking about selling it. Yeah, we should have actually sold it 20 years ago, but now, well, better late than never, as they say. All right. So here, this is utilitarianism. So I wanted to talk about this minimum wage argument. You should be familiar with this argument. You don't have to agree with me, but you have to understand what the argument is on the other side. The reason I discussed it with respect to utilitarianism, which is a type of consequentialism, okay, they try to think about the greatest good for the greatest number. So this is usually that kind of argument. Minimum wage argument is a utilitarian kind of argument. It will produce good. Actually, it will not produce good because it will not be sustainable. It will lead to job losses. So, and you're hurting the poor people the most, actually. So the other side of the consequentialist position is the deontological position, which is, again, similar to ex post. In deontology, basically what you say is that concept of duty and rights and permission. Okay, this is basically related to the law. So if the law says that you should not steal, then I have a duty not to steal. Okay. Right, permitted by moral rule or a law. Okay, moral rule is actually basically these moral rules are written into the law, okay, or a law permitted by a moral rule or law. So if you do things, you should be only doing things which are permitted by a moral rule or law, which are not forbidden. Okay, so so no matter how morally good the consequences, some choices are morally forbidden or legally forbidden. I'll just write this legally here again. So what you see is, for instance, one argument which prevails a lot in the US now, it's a Marxist argument actually, which is that suppose I have, in fact, somebody sent me a WhatsApp message on this the other day, that so there's a guy who's caught stealing, and then he says, they asked him, why did you steal? He says, well, I need money because I don't have money, I need to feed my family. And so the idea is that because you're poor and you have a need, this is a Marxist argument, that the Marxist will say he has a right to steal because he's poor and he has a need. Whereas the deontological argument is, no, you don't. We don't have. If stealing is legally forbidden, then we don't really care whether you starve to death or you don't have food, or you don't have food. You have a need. That's too bad. But you cannot steal. If stealing is forbidden, then you cannot steal. Simple. And so that is the deontological argument. The consequentialist argument would say that if you have a law against stealing, then those who are poor and starving and they have a need, they cannot satisfy their need by stealing. All right. So this is the kind of thinking actually that has gone into these laws which I talked about, where you're allowing in San Francisco, you're allowing, say, up to $950, up to $1,000 if you steal something. That's not considered a serious offense. It's not a felony. So because the idea is basically coming from here. Okay. So the reason we discuss all these things is partly because we want you to be comfortable discussing these abstract ideas. Okay. And we want you to understand the philosophical principles that lie behind certain policy measures. Okay, we also have many similar kind of policy measures. You will see, it may not have been a law, but when I was, growing up in West Bengal, we had in a very Marxist kind of government, and you would see this is a very popular argument in West Bengal that if you're a poor person, that you don't have to follow the law. So this is a very consequentialist kind of argument, okay, that and it's opposed to deontology. So those who are deontological will say whether you're poor or rich, you have to follow the law. But it's a very common, it used to be at least in those days, that poor people don't have to follow the law, okay, because they're poor. This is the opposite of the deontological position, that it says that, forget about the fact that you're helping poor people. It doesn't matter. If the law is there, everyone has to follow it, whether you're poor or rich. Okay. So this is the last distinction that we went through, deontological versus consequentialism. Okay, so it's important to understand these because they come into the policy debate, as you are seeing right now in the US with the minimum wage. And in India also we have a minimum wage. The difference between the US and India is that when the minimum wage law was made in India, nobody even complained about it. But at least in the US, there are some people who are complaining about it and saying that this will lead to job losses. So there are more, free market-oriented people in the US. So at least there is a voice for this kind of thinking. But in India, everybody is a socialist. So everyone is clapping when you have these kind of policies. But actually, it's not bad for the economy, because this is one of the reasons why our economy is not as vibrant as it could be, because there's too much regulation. Here's an example of regulation. It's a classic example of over-regulation. You want to talk about this? Here's, I want to give you this example. I want you to remember this, okay? Because this is, again, a very important, you're a business student, okay? So economic policy is very important for you, okay? This is a classic example of over-regulation, okay? Okay, over-regulation. So you'll notice that generally what happens in the economy is when you have over-regulated economies like India, one of the reasons we are not very dynamic as an economy, we are not able to achieve our potential is because, we have, the government is interfering in too many areas like minimum wage. It's not the job of the government to talk about a minimum wage. Well, the market will find its wages. When there is excess demand for labor, the price will go up. The price of labor will go up, wages will go up. Reason wages are low in India is that we have lots of people who are very poor and who are not very well skilled. And what is the reason for this? The part of the reason for this is the government is to blame for this, because the government has interfered in education and led to very bad education at a primary level for many, many people around the country. If the government had not interfered, okay, then yeah. There's some sound coming from her side. Okay. All right. So you have to understand all these things because they affect your life. They affect the level of prosperity in the economy in which you live. Okay. So the minimum wage is another classic example of over-regulation. So when you go into a policy debate, you can bring all these ideas into the policy debate. And if you understand them, this will also help your own maturity, contribute to your maturity as a business student. Okay. So many of these are not directly related to business law, but these are important ideas which you should be comfortable with. So over-regulated economies generally are not very prosperous. Okay, you will remember that from the first 3 years of the Trump administration, there was a tremendous economic boom in the U.S. And that, according to me, the main reason there was a tax cut also, but the main reason for that was that Trump was cutting regulations very aggressively. So there was a massive deregulation push, which, according to me, was the main reason for the economic vitality. So I feel that regulation is a big drain on economic vitality. So the more the government regulates, the less vibrant the economy is. The private sector should be left alone, and they will produce through competition. Okay, competition has to be taken care of. You can't allow people to stifle competition. But and so that's what the government should be focused on. But when through the forces of competition, it produces prosperity, the free market. So then you have the deontology, which is we already explained to you. Okay, so this completes this chapter. Okay, these are all taken from this Professor Lawrence Solom's blog. If you are interested in these legal philosophical ideas, you can read more about it here. Okay, a very good blog. So these are the set of ideas that we have discussed. Okay, so please make sure you understand them. You don't have to memorize. Don't memorize these things. Try to understand it in your own language. And as I said, I will never penalize you in a law exam for grammatically incorrect English or not writing perfect English. Okay, I want to just understand that you have understood the point and you can express, and you've expressed it in your own language. English may be incorrect. There will be no penalties for that. Okay, but there will be penalties if you try to copy paste or things like that. Do things like that. Okay, so because I don't even need a software to detect copy paste, I can see it and I can detect it on my own. Okay, so this is the idea, all right? So 11 distinctions that we have followed were very similar to each other. Okay, so please go through these points and make your own notes and understand that, make sure you understand these distinctions. Any questions, folks, at this stage? Any questions? Anybody? No? Okay, all right. Okay. All right. So let's move on to the next part, which is our next module is actually legal theory. Okay, we'll go through certain topics quickly. So these are all topics. Okay. Later on, I'll try to polish up the notes and make the topics clearer. So the first distinction is civil law versus the common law system. So here we are going. After this, we'll go straight into contract law. So we're a little bit behind, actually, slower than what I had planned, but it's okay. It's important to understand. It's important to ask questions. Okay. So civil law versus common law systems is basically like these are all common law systems. Okay. So these are all basically whatever is based on English law, former British colonies. So US, Canada, India, Australia, New Zealand. These are all common law systems, and civil law is based on the mainly on the Napoleonic Code, but mainly based on codes, Roman law and the Napoleonic Code in France. But civil law pertains in countries like Italy, Germany, France. DE is if you go to a German website, you'll see it says .de. Like in India, it says .in, because the earlier German currency, Deutschmark, is the symbol for that was DEM. So this is how the websites are, so FRF was the symbol for the French franc. So the French websites will be all .fr. Okay, so INR is the symbol for the Indian rupee. The Indian websites are all .in. So this is just you have to be aware that you have civil law systems here and common law systems in these countries. Okay, so the main difference is that in the common law countries, we have tremendous importance. Let's put it this way: high importance of not very good English, but anyway, you understand the point. Maybe we should just remove this. I just write it as importance of judicial precedent. In a common law system, the judicial precedents are very important. Whereas in a civil law system, the judicial precedents are not so important. That's the main distinction between the two. Okay, and we'll explain what judicial precedent is. These are actually previous decisions of the courts, which the later courts have to follow. That's what a precedent is. So we'll get into that. Okay, so here you can see the distinction. Okay, now. Most systems like India today, for instance, is what we call a mixed system, since there's a lot of codified law as well. Okay, so in the codified law means, say, Income Tax Act is codified law, Hindu Succession Act is codified law. Okay, so before we had the Hindu Succession Act, all the succession disputes in Hindu families were based on customary Hindu law. But now we have the Hindu Succession Act, so which will decide all these disputes. So this is codification. Okay, this is called codified law. So in the civil law countries, they focus mainly on codified law, whereas in the civil law countries. Okay, but in the common law system, we look at codified law, but we also look at judicial precedent, which is the previous judgments. Okay, so. Amendments, you can see amendments here. They're discussing an amendment. Okay, amendment to the juvenile bill. Okay, they were discussing an amendment, not changing the whole law, but just putting in an amendment. Now, amendments, so this is, you have to be familiar with these terms, amendments. So you can have an amendment act. Okay, like Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code Amendment Act. So you want to make some changes in the bankruptcy code, you pass an amendment act which contains all the necessary changes. Okay, so the amendments, another term that you need to understand. Now you're getting into the hardcore legal discussions. The amendments can apply either prospectively, but some can apply retrospectively. Okay, prospectively is generally the case. Okay, most of them, okay, will apply prospectively. Prospect means future. Okay, prospect means future, looking forward. Prospect is actually a view. Okay, it comes from the English word for view. When you're looking at something in front of you, that's called a prospect. Okay, it's like there's as you're approaching Delhi, you see Delhi in prospect. So Delhi is in front of you as you're approaching the city. Okay, so maybe the walls of Delhi are in front of you. Okay. So prospectively means, therefore, it is from the future. Okay, so like I say that every student must carry a laptop to the college. Now this is to apply prospectively, which means, suppose if today Ruchi is not carrying a laptop, I will not penalize her, because this rule is to apply prospectively. So tomorrow, if she doesn't bring a laptop, then I'll penalize her, because I've already made the rule today. And now from tomorrow, she will have to bring it. Okay, so that everybody will have to bring it. So this is the point you understand. Apply prospectively, which is true for most of the amendments. Okay, and then some of them may apply retrospectively, which is especially in tax law, this comes up a lot. Okay, income tax law. You'll see I don't think we'll have a chance to do that case, but there is a case. There are many cases where if it's a procedural kind of amendment, okay, or if it's a clarificatory amendment, okay, if it's a clarificatory amendment, with respect to procedures, okay, then they will apply even retrospectively sometimes, but even other provisions can apply retrospectively, okay. Clarificatory amendments, normally we say, is they apply retrospectively, okay. Amendments with respect to procedure. So we are learning new terms, prospectively and retrospectively. Retrospective means looking backwards. So there's a famous case in India, which is the Vodafone case, Vodafone versus Union of India, which happened, I think, in 2012. Okay, so in that case, following that case, the Finance Act, where the government lost that case, and they basically nullified the effect of losing that case by making changes in the Finance Act, many of which were to be applied retrospectively, okay, which basically a substantive law even changes which were applying retrospectively. So that means they would be applying to transactions that happened even before the passing of this act, okay. So that's what is the meaning of retrospectively, prospectively and retrospectively. This is two terms that you should learn, okay. Amendments can apply prospectively or retrospectively. Okay. UOI in the cases will be Union of India, okay. This is 2012. I think it's 2012, yeah. Okay, so this is basically it. So, so we're talking about amendments. The codified law, which is the terms that you're learning, are civil law systems, common law systems, different countries. Okay, mainly the former English colonies are all common law systems. Okay, judicial precedent is important. Previous judgments on similar matters. Okay, very important in common law systems. These are called mixed systems because there's a lot of codified law. So you give the decision on the case with respect to codified law and judicial precedent. These are both important. Okay, codified law will include amendments. Amendments could be either prospective or retrospective. Very famous case of retrospective substantive changes in India, which created a hue and cry internationally because international businesses did not like it. It was basically meant more money for the government of India, tax revenue, and obviously more money for GOI means less money for the businesses. So they didn't like it. It caused a huge hue and cry. And some of those cases are still going on, actually. I think there's some of those arbitration. I think that particular dispute is still going on because there's an arbitration ruling and the government is trying to appeal that ruling. So it's a long story. It's a very bad, I think it's a very bad advertisement for India because you're trying to attract international capital and the government should not actually it's a lot of money, but there's also the bigger picture of attracting international investment. If international businesses feel that our government is very anti-business, trying to maximize tax revenue in the short term, this will lead to less investment in India, which has its own negative consequences. So therefore, we should take a bigger picture view and long-term view, and we should not. I feel we should not, when the Supreme Court has given a judgment on a particular case, we should not have done what was done in this case. Okay, the government, the way that has continued to fight against the Supreme Court ruling, it's not a good advertisement for the country. Okay, it basically means the government is acting like a bully, and it scares away international businesses, and that's not a good thing. So, okay, second is, the second point we want to study is, so it's a little story. You can read up on this case if you want to. It's interesting to understand the business environment and it's still going on. The saga of this thing is still going on. Okay, this saga is still going on. Okay, second point is hierarchy of courts. Okay, you can actually read these two. Okay, so this you can read this. This is I've kept it optional. Okay, separate. The hierarchy of courts. There's a presentation here which you can read. I'm not going to go into it. Hierarchy of court only means that you have. This is actually taken from a presentation from the web, so I've given the credit to in the top in the main slide. I've just connected to it. Okay, so this hierarchy of courts is simple. You know what is meant by hierarchy. It's the Supreme Court is on top, and then you have here like something like this. If we put this is our this is kind of our whiteboard here. So here you have. So if we start today. Today is what? Today is 23rd, right? So we have 223. I hope the date format is correct. Okay, so anyway, so you have here the Supreme Court on top. Okay, Supreme Court here. Then you have all the various high courts on the below the Supreme Court. So it's pretty obvious stuff. Okay, I'm not going to write this. So you have High Court here, High Court of Gujarat, High Court of Calcutta, High Court of Madras. Okay. By interestingly, High Court of Calcutta is not called High Court of Kolkata. Okay, it is called High Court of. It's still called the Calcutta High Court, and I think the Madras High Court is also not called Chennai High Court. It's called Madras High Court. So that's interesting. Okay, so now, so you have all these high courts below them. Okay. So you have another high court, and then below that you have the district courts. Okay, so if you go here, under that you have the district courts. Okay, so and so on and so forth. Okay, so and then you have under the district courts also there is a big hierarchy. You have the sessions judge and all that. So what I'm not going to go through that in the class because it's just very procedural stuff. Okay, it's kind of like telling you, this whatever color means this color means this in traffic rules, etc. So you can read it up on your own. I'm not going to spend class time on that. So I've given you the link. You can just read it on your own and understand. Okay, I'm not going to ask you questions on this. This is just for your understanding. Okay, just make sure you have a sense of what is going on in terms of hierarchy of courts. And then you have special courts, etc. in terms of special courts for income tax, special matters for under Delhi Rent Control Act. Everything is decided by the rent controller and all that. So those kind of things. So it's court of the rent controller. So the second point here is, so it's another point. The first point is this civil law, common law. Then you have hierarchy of courts, which you study on your own. Okay, you have questions, then you can ask me. Then we have this concept, we're coming to the concept of judicial precedent. Okay, this is stare decisis, judicial precedent. Okay, which basically says, it comes from a Latin phrase. This is the Latin phrase. Okay, that which is decided, don't disturb something which has been settled. Okay, so basically this requires the judges to, when some new case comes up, so if there is a case of theft and it is decided in a particular way, and that something maybe was taken, somebody lifted up, somebody picked up something, but it did not really leave the room with it, but just picked it up, and that was determined as theft. Okay, so if there's something substantively wrong with that decision, then the next case that comes up, where there's a similar situation where somebody picked it up and the question is whether this was theft, did not leave the room, but then they'll say that, okay, we look at the previous case, which is a precedent in this case, and there it was decided that it is, a case of theft. So therefore, here also we should decide that is a case of theft. Okay, so this is an example of how you allow judicial precedents to determine future decisions in similar cases. Okay, so you have in criminal law, you can have these precedents in every branch of the law. Okay, so pay respect to previous decisions on similar matters. Okay, so the idea here is again very similar to the points that we mentioned in defending legal formalism. The value of stare decisis is basically lies in providing clarity. Okay, that if we have a previous precedent, everybody knows what the previous decision was all about. Okay, so in the future also, if you have a similar case, then there'll be a similar decision. So if people can have that kind of confidence, that gives a lot of confidence to that, really helps businesses a lot in terms of doing their plans, making their plans. And on that basis, so like tax law has serious implications here, because if you have a certain type of tax ruling, then businesses can, and if you can rely on that tax ruling being followed in the future, then businesses can organize their units in that way, especially on transfer pricing matters and things like that. So you need to have certain transparency, a certain certainty and consistency in the way that cases are decided. So this is how. This is why stare decisis is important. This is pronounced as stare decisis. So the doctrine of precedent, and it's very important. And one of the reasons why common law systems are very much preferred, let's say, by businesses, because they can have this kind of clarity in terms of how our court will interpret certain matters. Animal spirits, you should understand this term. It's a term used. Again, this is something that you should know. It actually comes from, this term comes from an English economist called John Maynard Keynes. So there is a guy called J.M. Keynes who wrote a very famous book called The General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money. And in this, he said basically that so we are jumping from economics, from law to economics. But there is a connection between law and economics. I think I described to you briefly earlier when we talked about regulation, that how deregulation creates a lot of economic vitality. And this is similar to that, because deregulation basically takes a lot of pressure off the businesses. They don't have to worry about compliance with various types of laws. And it also gives them certain kind of, because when you have a regulation, it can always be interpreted in various ways by various officials. So it creates a lot of uncertainty for businesses. So this is kind of similar to that. And so there's a concept of animal spirits. So this term comes from, you should understand it. As a business student, you need to understand this term, be familiar with it. Animal spirits is a term that comes from Keynes in this book called General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money. A very important book as an economics text, because it leads to this idea of Keynesianism, Keynesian policies, which are actually not, which are misrepresented actually, what Keynes actually meant. But generally they call for government stimulus, government stimulus to revive moribund economies, so moribund economies. But this is not exactly what Keynes meant, but nowadays these are just referred to as Keynesian policies, where you have government stimulus to revive economies, and then this has just become an excuse. It's become an excuse for governments to keep on spending more and more money, But animal spirits is a slightly different term. I mentioned Keynesian policies because you should be aware of this, because it comes from this book, and this is a very important policy approach in economic policy making. So as a business student, you should be aware of these terms because they affect the policy debate. They feature in the policy debate, and you should be able to participate in a meaningful way. All right. So like in that budget debate, we could have actually asked, we didn't have time actually, but one of the things we could have done is brought in the students and asked the students, okay, what do you think? Which policy do you support, etc. So there you get to participate in a policy debate, and these are kind of some of the terms that you can use. So animal spirits means nothing but generally business spirits, business sentiment. So animal spirits basically talks about business sentiment. So if we say it's referring to business sentiment, So if business is very bullish, business is very positive about the future of the economy, then we say that animal spirits are quite strong, etc. So or animal spirits are high, etc. And so this is what happens and generally what happens is when you have a lot of deregulation, okay, when you have businesses have clarity regarding the interpretation of laws. So if you see in the case of the Indian tax code, it's a very complicated piece of legislation. Many people have suggested, like Harish Salve also has suggested, is a very famous lawyer. Harish Salve has suggested that India should move to a simple tax with tax on book profits. Okay, so whatever profits you declare, you pay a certain simple tax on book profits. That will get rid of this highly complicated Income Tax Act, which is causing a lot of uncertainty among businesses as to how it will be interpreted by a particular assessing officer. So to remove all that. So generally what happens, animal spirits thrive when, well, let's put it this way. And all economies need animal spirits to be buoyant, actually, and animal spirits are buoyant in an environment of deregulation or low regulation, let's say, low regulation and high certainty about how laws will be applied. Okay, and what the laws are and how laws are is about what the law is. And how laws will be applied. So if you have a simple tax code, it's much clearer, and and if you write the law properly, it's much clearer, and you don't have too many, you have stare decisis. So we're discussing this in the context of stare decisis, where judges have the discipline to follow previous judgments on similar matters. Then you see a situation where it creates a lot of certainty in businesses about how laws are going to be applied, and that is generally good for animal spirits. Okay, and animal spirits, you need to have buoyant animal spirits, otherwise you don't have economic prosperity. That's what it is. So if you see, for instance, I've told you to study economic history in different countries, especially the US, which is the biggest economy in the world. You will see that if you see those first 3 years before COVID, okay, because Trump was engaging in a very aggressive program of deregulation, okay, that had a very positive impact on animal spirits and business sentiment, and it led to a very vital economic, scenario where, wages were going up, tremendous rise in household income, median household income. So it was a very, very positive economic experience because mainly I believe it was driven by the deregulation. Okay, so this is very important because that's how what is the point of running a country? Obviously is to create prosperity. Okay, economic prosperity trumps everything. Okay, you can talk about all kinds of social welfare, you can put more money in your defense budget, but everything comes from economic prosperity. If you don't have a prosperous economy, then you pretty much can't do anything. Okay. So I hope you guys are following here. Let me just ask somebody let's ask Mrinal. Mrinal, are you following what I'm saying? Is this becoming a boring lecture, or are you following what I'm saying? Yes, Mrinal? I'm not able to hear you. Okay, let me ask somebody else. Okay, Malika, are you able to hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, are you following? Okay,
Yes, sir.
okay, good. Because this whole thing is in lecture mode. Okay, so I want to be very careful. So you should not switch off. So this is a request to you. You have to understand the purpose of this course. So you and I are in it together. All of us are in it together. Okay, I'm like your coach. I have decided that these are certain things which you have to learn about. Now, this could be a wrong decision, but you're pretty much stuck with me, okay? Because I have been given the decision, I have been given the right to teach you, so you are stuck with whatever I teach you. So you just trust in my judgment. because you can't do anything about it anyway. So try to understand the points that I'm trying to cover. And if you have a question, as I said, your duty is, I have removed your duty to take notes. Okay, I personally did not like taking notes when I was a student. I was a student quite recently also as a law student. So I don't like taking notes, because when you're taking notes, you can't concentrate, okay, what the teacher is saying, on what the teacher is saying. So I want you to forget about taking notes. I'll give you all the notes. You just concentrate on listening to what the teacher is saying. And the moment you have any doubt, even a one comma or full stop is not clear, your duty is to ask a question, okay? So in section B, we get fewer questions. Section A, we get a lot of questions. But even in section A, there are only few people asking questions, okay? So more people should ask questions. So please do not tune off. Please pay attention, because we and all of us together are going to achieve this outcome, that I will try to cover as much material as possible. And at the end of the course, it may be a very traditional lecture kind of course, okay, like your traditional DU university course. But I will try to ensure that we have a good outcome, that you will learn some material. You'll learn some solid body of material, okay? Yes, Tanuj?
I was having one doubt regarding the tax that you were saying. I couldn't hear you.
Yeah.
I could only hear that we should be like the government should only the company should be taxed according to the profits that they declare.
Yeah.
So, but won't it lead to discrepancies in like while they show the companies will show less profit in that case?
Okay,
Like
good question. Good question. Okay, I'll just come to that. Where was I discussing that? Clarity of interpretation of laws, right? So in this context, I discussed the Harish Salve's proposal for, and many other people have given a proposal for. Let's discuss it in this context, okay? So we can discuss it here actually. Consistency. So proposal for we can take it as a tax on book profits. Right now, what happens in the Income Tax Act is that they have all kinds of rules on what kind of expense you can deduct, this and that. And then they usually have we'll do some cases where whether this is a valid expense or not for deduction, and they are going back and forth fighting over it, Income Tax Department and the business, okay? So there is a proposal for taxing book profits. So what Tanuj is pointing is a good point, actually, is pointing out is a good point. Proposal for tax on book profits. So whatever profits are declared, whatever profit is declared, pay tax on that, okay? Forget about spelling, okay? Pay tax rate on that, okay? So this point of that problem that we have today, why is this proposal being given? Because today the problem is that what is your actual profit taxable income? We don't know, because the guy is saying, the business is saying that this should be deductible, this expense should be deductible, and assessing officer saying, no, it should not be deductible. So the taxable income cannot be determined properly, okay? So they're saying that forget about all this hassle, just go for tax on book profits, which is a declared profit, okay? So whatever profit is declared, pay tax rate on that. Now, what Tanuj is saying is, will businesses under declare profits, okay? Now, the problem with this is, okay, yes, on the face of it, this could be a concern, especially for closely held businesses, okay? But remember that more of a risk, okay, for closely held businesses, okay, private companies, partnerships, okay. But even there it will apply, okay, private companies and partnerships, okay, partnerships. But even there, the same rule applies. The problem is, but businesses have I'll just write biz has an incentive, as in business community, okay? Business community has an incentive to declare maximum profit, okay? Why is that? Now you think about publicly traded companies first. Later on, I'll come to the closely held businesses, okay? Closely held businesses are like this, okay? Private companies, closely held businesses, okay? Where everything is held by a few people. Public company, as you know, the definition of public company in the Indian company. Yes, Tanu, you have another question? Or the same one, right? Okay.
Oh no, sir. I was just answering, sir.
Yeah. Okay. So let me just complete. This is a very good question, actually. If you have a tax on book profit, so it becomes leads a policy discussion. Okay, this is the kind of discussion we should have, because as we go through these discussions, you will learn how to argue. Okay, which is more important than covering some element of syllabus. As I said, we are not concerned with covering some syllabus. We are concerned with whatever we learn. Students should ask questions. We will go back and forth answering their questions, and whatever we cover, this should be 100% embedded in your brain forever. Okay, that's all I require. We're not trying to cover any syllabus. Okay, now what is the problem? Business has an incentive to declare maximum profit. Think about the public companies. Okay, now today, what will happen if Airtel declares less profit? Do you think the share will go up or down? Tanuj?
Down, sir.
Down. So you see the logic that business has
Yes, sir. For public companies, so yes, sir. Like it depends upon the share market. Like the
so,
share gets affected.
so business has an incentive to declare maximum profit to attract future investors. Okay, future investors and funding. Okay, and funding. Okay, so there's an incentive for businesses to declare money. So there is an inbuilt check and balance. Okay. And even in private companies, what will happen is that you see there is because at the end of the day, why are people even in a partnership? People want to withdraw some money. So if you're very, very rich, multi-billionaire, then maybe you don't need to withdraw money. It doesn't really make a difference, and let it remain in the business. But many people would like to withdraw money. So even if you're under declaring partnership income, remember you can't pay the partners. If you're showing only $100 million worth of profit, and you have 3 partners and you're paying each of them $50 million, how are you doing that? Because the distribution is more than the profit. Okay, so therefore there is, even if your partners have an incentive to withdraw maximum money from the business generally. Okay, once you become Bill Gates, you don't really care whether the money is in the business or in your hands, but most people are not in that situation. So partnerships, now you see this here even in a closely held business, because you cannot distribute more profits than you have made. All right, so I mean, in certain cases you can, but generally you don't. Okay, so therefore you have an incentive to declare maximum profit. So this will basically act as a check. So the advantage is a good proposal, actually, because it will get rid of this problem of what is the profit. Right now the big problem, a lot of money is wasted on arguing about what is the taxable income. This will get rid of that problem. Okay, it will dramatically reduce litigation, and it will help. It will give business a lot of certainty here. Think about this certainty. We are talking about certainty. Certainty is very important for businesses. You might have heard these discussions in the stock market, that one of the reasons the stock market goes down is because of lack of certainty. They don't mind if there is a loss, but we want to know what the amount of the loss is. Suppose we know there's a scam in PNB, but we don't know what the extent of the scam is, how much money was stolen. So when there's uncertainty, there's a negative impact. But once we know, okay, so fine, 6,000 crores was stolen, fine. Okay, at least now we know the number, now we can move on. So certainty is always, it doesn't have to be good news, but it has to be certainty. There has to be certainty, okay? So this is the idea. Does that answer your question, Tanuj?
Yes, sir, but still I'm not too convinced with that key private companies, they have to declare profit. Like they can even show the partners as salary members, and they can give the salary, and then they say that okay, this is a loss and we are not earning that much of profit, that we come in this tax bracket. Like there are multiple ways that the private companies, like this proposal doesn't go with I know it will work with the public companies, of course, but not with the private companies, according to me.
Yeah, you're right about that. It's more difficult in the case of private companies. But what you're talking about is actually more of, you're talking about inaccurate auditing. You're actually talking about, so essentially you have auditors also to check, okay? Although in India, auditors don't do their job properly. So that's why you have the Satyam scam, okay? Auditors act as a check, okay? As a check on uh, false accounting. Okay, so if you under declare profits, what is the auditor there for? The auditor is there to act as a check, because SR Bartleboy or whoever, if their own reputation is on the line. As you saw, there have been some actions taken against Price Waterhouse in their because of their role in the Satyam computer scam, because they did not do a proper job. They did not verify the fixed deposit receipts. They did not go to the bank and verify the FD receipts that Satyam showed them. So they didn't do their job as auditors. So they have been penalized. So auditors also have an incentive to do a proper job, and they are there as to act as oversight, to provide oversight to company accounting. Okay, so you see there's a little bit of further counter to what Tanuj is saying. That are you following, Tanuj? That auditors to some extent,
Yes, sir.
yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes.
So no, but the problem, of course, is the system is what Tanuj is saying is not a very. It's an important point, because you have to just make a distinction between whether the system structure is such that if the system works properly, will it work? That's one important question. But of course, if if people are dishonest, then no system in the world can save you. Okay, if auditors are dishonest, and companies, there sometimes auditors collude with companies, okay, then of course no system in the world can save you. All right, so there's your bell, so I will not delay it. Okay? But okay, one more thing, guys, please understand. Okay, in the previous class we had this problem in the previous class, that people just started getting up. I was just late by 1 minute, and people in the classroom and all started getting up, and now once again somebody has shut off the video in 104B. So please do not leave the class until I actually give you the okay. I'm very particular about protecting students' time. Okay, that's why I have the alarm, so that I don't forget. But if one day I might take 1 minute extra or something, or 2 minutes extra. So you should leave only when the class is over. Okay. All right. So we are done now. I can, if there is any kind of a substantive question, yeah, I can.
Thank you, sir. Thank
Okay.
you, sir.
Yeah, so you guys are dismissed. But if you have a substantive question, like we had the other day, when actually we overshot the class by even 1 hour, because we had a lot of questions in section A. So in that way, we are prepared to do that at any point of time. The general class is dismissed, but those who want to stay back, if they have a substantive question, I will keep that as part of the recording, and otherwise we will just stop the recording. Anybody, any other question? Anyone has any question?
No, sir.
Okay. All right. Okay, then in that case, guys, we'll close the recording.
Sir, I'll stay back for a minute, sir.
Yeah. Who's that? Tanuj?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Ask your question. The rest of you can go. Whoever doesn't have a question can go. Yeah. Tanuj, you can go ahead.
Thank you,
So,
sir.
like for this tax only, like if we are talking about the international economy, we can say that the best taxable the system that is there was in Dubai. Like they were actually tax free, and or you can say the US, the taxable income. But in India, this proposal like the system has to be, the system is not yet ready to get this proposal on board with the finance department. We can say that.
Yeah. What you're saying, in India, there's still too much unchecked corruption. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, sir. So not even the corruption, like people, it's since there are so many companies coming up, and new companies are coming up. Now, if we talk about Reliance or public listed companies, then there won't be any discrepancies with the profits there. But when you're talking about the startups, there are a bit of discrepancies, and the system is not yet ready to cover that. And what GST has done is, due to GST, the gaps in taxable income, the taxable profits have decreased.
Not have this incentive. Okay. So what Tanuj is saying is, so first thing, as I said, is that one thing, of course, you have to understand is that if people are dishonest, then no system will work. Okay.
Yes, sir.
So when we are evaluating the relative merits of different systems, we have to assume that people will not be dishonest on a massive scale. There will be some bad people, but by and large, people will be honest. Okay, and they will follow the system. We have to assume that, otherwise, because no system will work. Okay, so now the question that Tanuj just raised: do startups not have an incentive? Okay, to to declare maximum. Now think about this. If Tanuj starts a company now, what is his goal? He's starting today in his garage, maybe he's starting a website, okay? What does he want to do? Does he want to remain in his garage all the time, or does he want to become a multi-billion dollar publicly traded company? You want to become a big company, right? Right?
Yes, survive, and first will be so survive and then become a big
Yeah.
company.
Yeah. So, but the point is, again, you have the same incentives. Okay. So, more VC funding will come in, more PE, VC is venture capital, PE is private equity. Funding will come to companies which show higher profits. Book profit. You understand that? So tomorrow, if you start a
Yes.
company now, you start a company, you operate for a couple of years. Now you want to become bigger, you want some VC funding, you go to the VC and you show him your financials. If you under declare your profits, the VC will say, well, you're not making much money. So you actually have, even as a private company, you have the same incentive as a public company. Maybe it's not 100% enforced in this exactly same way because you're still small, but still the same problem remains that where are you going to get your funding to become bigger? Okay. If you want bank financing, the bank will, and you have under declared your profits, the bank will look at your financials because you can't get bank loans unless you're Nirav Modi or something. But in generally, you have to get bank loans by showing profits on your books. Okay.
There has to be stable turnover, like the company should have a regular turnover with
Yeah. So and
certain amount.
actually the more the chance of getting money is more, funding is more if you have better profits, higher profits, right? So
Yes, sir.
you will see that even a smaller company, even a closely held company, a private company, they actually have the same incentive. The basic incentive is this, that incentive to declare maximum profit is to act. This is the incentive basically. So the system functions on incentives. Okay. The reason you had all these frauds and these PNB fraud is because it's a public.
So your voice is gone.
Yeah. Can you hear me clearly now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So the reason you have, sometimes I get this message saying your internet connection is unstable, although it's actually, I can see my GeoFi, indicator also going blue. Yeah. So it's just, it's a fresh device for each session. There's 2 GB in it. And it's just, it's not, they are not able to provide a good thing. So the incentive, try to understand the incentive here. The incentive is the same actually, whether you're a public company or a small company, because everybody wants to get bigger, and to get bigger you need more funding. And when you go for funding, whether it's bank funding or VC or PE, etc., okay, or bank funding, okay, because these guys give you equity capital generally, and these guys give you debt capital. Okay, so bank funding or capital market funding, okay, or cap market funding, whatever you want, okay, more. Let me put all these here. Okay, these are all right. So more funding can be VCPE, which is basically private equity type. Then bank is basically debt capital. In capital markets, you can get both equity and debt capital. So all this, so the basic incentive is here, that if I don't declare high profits, I'm not going to get future investors, and I'm not going to get funding to get bigger. So therefore, there is an incentive. So you see how beautifully an economic system functions. Okay, it's all based on incentives. I'm making you do something which is generally considered to be a desirable social outcome, is to declare the profit properly. Okay, show how much money you made, and you do have an incentive to declare maximum profit, because otherwise you're not going to get future investors and funding. This is clear now, Tanuj?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I have now convinced you. You are now in favor of.
Yes. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, also, sir, for Indian market, so according to you, was the GST a good idea? Has it improved the economy by the GST that was introduced by Mr. late Arun Jaitley, sir?
Yeah, see, no question that in general, obviously, it's a good idea, because you're standardizing the tax system, the indirect tax system across the country, instead of having multiple tax systems. But they implemented it very badly, according to me. Actually, for instance, like I haven't studied it much because I'm more interested in direct taxes. But one thing I do know is that they have required separate registration in each state. Okay, so if I'm not mistaken, that is the requirement. It's a ridiculous requirement. If I can have one Aadhaar card and one PAN card for the whole of India, but even Aadhaar card you see
Sir,
with
I think that has been changed, sir. Like one business should have, like if you are entering into a new business or a new sector, then you need to have a new GST. But the main head office, like where your office is, if my head office is registered office is in Mumbai,
yeah.
I can still have the same GST number in Mumbai of Mumbai and having a branch office in Delhi as well.
Okay, yeah. So they have changed. Initially, it was not the case. So they have changed
So they
that.
have changed now. They have changed. As far as I'm aware about the companies, like I was working with Shimaru. So
Yeah.
there we used to deal with government sales only. I was handling the government sales there. So we used to give our GST for Mumbai registered office.
Okay, okay.
It
So
was
good
it
that
was
they changed that. Yeah. But I think in general there can be lots of other improvements in the implementation. But generally there is no question that it is a good idea, because it gives you a standardized indirect tax system across the country. It's absolutely a good idea. But the question is, but the problem in India is that even good ideas we can mess it up, because we have such a love for the government in India. Every government, it's not a question of BJP or Congress, they're all the same. Everybody is a socialist, and they all love regulation. They just love making rules. Just government bureaucrats, they just love making rules. You give them an opportunity, they'll write 50 million rules, and then that just messes everything up, because there are so many rules, it becomes highly confusing. They should have focused on simplicity and user convenience. Okay, which is very difficult. So it was questioned as definitely a good idea, but it can be made better in terms of implementation. And you think about all these matters. Even a different business also should be the same, because in many, if you look at companies, we will study something called the objects clause in a company, which is basically tells you about what kind of businesses that company can. If it is within the objects clause of that company, why should you even need a new number even for that, even registration even for that? Because if it is within the objects clause of that company, and then you should try to make it simpler and simpler for businesses. They have to have this idea that they have to understand that this is a problem we have in our country. We don't have the government regulators, and the bureaucrats don't understand the negative effect on business sentiment, on animal spirits, okay, of over regulation. Okay, this is a story. I'll tell you the story here. There was actually President Trump was talking about this when he had a discussion with business CEOs, and he told them, okay, I'll give you an option. Okay, you can take only one of the two. One option is I'll give you a 20% income tax cut, and the other option is I'll give you a 75% cut in regulations. But you can take only one of these two. Which one will you take? So he said that most of the CEOs said, we'll take the regulation cut. Okay, forget about tax rates. I'll take the regulation cut. Well, regulation has a very bad impact on business sentiment. Okay, so this is something that we don't understand in this country. And you give it to a government regulator, the guy starts, he thinks that the purpose of his life is to make rules. Okay, and he starts.
yes, right. In India, especially, sir.
Yeah, so this is a problem we have in this country, and we have to fix that problem. So we have to understand the connection between regulation, animal spirits, and economic vitality. Okay, so it's very important to understand. In this case, we have a recent case study where if you see the prosperity that you saw in the pre-COVID 3 years of Trump in the US is actually historic. I've been following the US economy for many years. It was astounding economic prosperity. And it was possible mainly, according to me, because of deregulation. And so we can also achieve that kind of prosperity in our country. But we have to have the brains to first understand that the government regulation is actually a drain on the economy. But instead of that, what we are doing is we are passing minimum wage laws and things like that. So that's a
Yes,
problem.
sir.
Yeah, that's a
So
problem.
like from 2014 to if I talk about United States, sir, even as late as 2015, from 2015, the way the Trump had brought in the policies, it was actually business friendly policies, which generated more of the employment and growth in the economy. Like if we see the chart also, the economy
Yeah,
was actually at its peak when Trump was there.
yeah. So it's actually not from 15, but from 16, late 16 onwards. Okay, so well, he got elected in November 2016.
Yes, sir. So, sorry, sir. Sorry for the year, sir. But yeah, like sir, that is why, like, even when the re-elections that took place, the most of the business people were in support of Trump to come into the power because he was letting the business to grow.
Yeah, so small businesses businesses benefited a lot actually, and if you look at when I look at that, I wish that we could do that in our country, because the economic prosperity was really, it was truly astounding actually, astounding economic prosperity. It's as if you are watching people like Kumble bowling or somebody like that, or Harbhajan is bowling, and suddenly a Brett Lee comes and starts bowling. In difference in speed, it was very, very dramatic. So,
Yes, sir.
so that was something I feel, again, mainly due to there was a tax cut, also a big tax cut, business tax cut, and also a small business personal income tax cut that was only for 7 years. They made a lot of important changes in that tax code of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Generally very pro-business kind of legislation. So that's what we need in this country, so that we can deliver economic prosperity for our people. But that's, well, still not happening actually. Let's see what happens.
Sir, our main focus in India is to get the improve our image in front of the world, not right now. The main concern is not internally, according to me.
Yeah, yeah,
Like they're just increasing,
yeah. So
they're just increasing the image.
we have to get foreign investment also. So because of that,
Yes.
yeah. So
Yes, sir. The main focus for the current government is to get more and more foreign investments, sir.
hmm,
Like what Trump did was to generate employment for his own, like the within the country, like white men were given more priority towards the job opportunities, and he was demotivating foreign people to come into the market for jobs. The first priority was given to the United States people, and there.
not really white men, but Americans as such.
No, no, sir. So mainly Americans, sir. Like if you see the policies also now, if we see the H1B visa rules that people were getting, IT companies were getting difficulties in getting the H1B visa. He
Yeah.
banned the visa because he wanted to give employment to his own country people.
Yeah, actually, what they have done is, if you see, well, his main goal was really to raise the wages. If you see what he did in the visa rule, if you see the H-1B visa rule, so there's that 65,000 or something amount that goes, number of visas that are given every year. What he said was, actually, if you look at the goal, his goal was really to raise, not so much to cut the immigration, but more to raise the wages. So what he did was, actually, he said that instead of having a guarantee that you will get 65K visas, okay, whoever applies, first come, first serve, he said you bid for it. So we'll give it to the guys who are paying the highest 65K salaries. Okay, so the 65K guys who are paying the highest salaries. So the objective really was to raise the wages. So his policy target, if you see, is really to raise wages domestically. Okay, which therefore again has a virtuous cycle kind of impact. Because when you are earning more wages, you will also spend more on consumption, and consumption will lead to greater economic investment, and it's a virtuous cycle. So it's actually more, see, if you notice the policy step that was taken, they did not cut the number of visas. They changed the method, and they said we'll give it to, instead of first come for FCFS, we'll give it to the top bidders. And so the effect of that is to actually raise the minimum, raise the average wage of the H-1B awardees. So that's the objective actually. So if I think you were not aware of that particular tweak, right? So that's the objective.
Yes, I was not aware about that.
Yeah. So that's what they're trying to do, which is, again, you can see the connection between higher wages and it has a virtuous cycle kind of effect. Because higher wages, if you're earning more money, you will spend more.
Demand increases, consumption increases. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so that's the virtuous cycle. So it's a very so everything is actually, because this guy, he's the business guy, so everything he looks at like a businessman. So he looks at, that's why he came up with the regulation idea, because he knows as a businessman that regulation is going to be creates a disincentive for businesses. So everything is driven by being having come from the world of business. So that's
That
the
actually helped him, sir. That actually helped the United States to during that period.
yeah. So you need to at the end of the day, see, everything starts with, you can do all kinds of social welfare spending, okay, all that your flexibility to do all that becomes much greater once you have a thriving economy. So everything starts with because if you start just handing out government handouts, I mean, how much you can't really go on for like that for very long. So you need to have a naturally thriving economy that will give you more tax revenue for the government, and then you can use that money to do all kinds of social spending if you think it is important. Some people have to be taken care of. That's not unimportant, but first you have to make sure that you have a thriving. Without a thriving economy, everything is gone in the long run. So if you see today, one of the reasons we don't have enough money for defense is we don't have a sufficiently thriving economy. If we had followed free market policies for the last 20 years, we would have be a much bigger economic power, and we could have spent more money on defense. So these are all connected ideas actually. So 2 points.
Yes, so but India is now looking to be one of the biggest economies, like due to COVID and people shifting their manufacturing units from China to India, 5G coming into India by Reliance, and the COVID vaccines. I think that this is going to be the new phase of the economic growth in future, maybe 5 years or 7 years down the line.
I hope everybody is. I'm still not convinced because
Like that's how I can, that's how I can relate. Like I'm not seeing any growth or any changes in the economy for next 5 to 7 years, but these three things, like the company shifting to India and the 5G coming, being manufactured by Reliance, then the COVID vaccines, this is gonna change the whole scenario of India in front of the world, maybe
yeah,
in terms of economy
positive.
as well.
What you're not wrong. You're not wrong. These are all positive factors. I think the only difference between your outlook and my outlook is that I still don't think they're doing enough. What you're saying is not incorrect. These are all positive things, but I still think they have to be much more radical when it comes to reforming the tax code and basically attracting. We can do much more to attract international capital, which we need for infrastructure spending. So I just say that you're right. What you're saying is correct, but according to me, we need to do much more. That's all I'm saying. Yeah.
Yes, so maybe I could, like, of course, so like what I can understand, maybe with your experience, so maybe I can get more of knowledge about these things. It's just that I like to read these things so and analyze the situation.
Yeah.
So that is
No, it's good
um
that you're aware of all these things. As I said, all the points you mentioned are all correct and they're all positive factors. All I'm saying is it's not good enough. Like it's like you scored 120 runs pre-lunch session in the pre-lunch session, and I'm saying
yes, sir.
that's not good enough. You should have scored 240. So
Yes, sir.
that's all I'm saying actually. Not that your score is bad, but
Yes.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for all the time. Sorry, sir, I took like 20
You
minutes
don't have
extra.
to. 1 minute. You don't have. Let's be clear. This is the whole purpose of the class. Is that in fact I want more people to ask more questions, and we should have more of these discussions. So you should never apologize for asking questions. Your duty as a student is to ask questions.
Yes, so I prefer asking question at the end only. So like it gets distracted in between. So I was just waiting, like if it is like when the time comes up, so I'll just talk to you and I just clear off my
Right.
doubts at that.
No, that's fine. No, so in fact, I will also do that in the future when I am not very good at doing that. I tend to answer the question as soon as it is asked. But I will also try to be, if I feel the question is not directly related to the point we are discussing, then I will push that question to the end of the class so that we don't detain the other guys. But obviously, I'll not do that for every question because many of the questions are actually directly relevant to the point that is being discussed. Okay, so
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So don't, and for never apologize for asking questions. That is actually your, in fact, you should apologize for not asking questions. Those who have not asked should apologize.
No, sir.
So not you. Okay.
No, no, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Okay. Take care. Bye. I'll
Thank
see
you, sir.
you in the next class. Okay.
Bye bye, sir. Bye bye.
Bye.
Good night. Thank you, sir.
Welcome.